Check, 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 check. Right now I'm just testing things out. Okay, let's test this out. Check, 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 check. Hey, sorry, yeah, I'm just testing now, making sure everything's good with the streaming part. But yeah, I'm ready. I'll be. Yeah, if you want, it'll just be a couple minutes while it's making sure everything's coming through. Oh yeah? Do you want one? Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely, and have somebody put out an announcement. I mean, I've got plenty of time if you do, if you want to, like, get somebody to do it and stuff. Maybe ping someone like an Arco or Dantis or... I'll be right back, I'm just testing things out. It'll just be a couple minutes on it, making sure everything's coming through. Oh yeah? The audio's not coming through from... Let me check some settings here. No, yeah, absolutely, and have somebody put out an announcement. I mean, I've got plenty of time if you do, if you want to, like, get somebody to do it and stuff. Let's see if that's working. Someone like an Arco or Dantis.
Animals' interactions with each other.
Alright, I don't think I'm going to be able to use my headphones. Let's check this out.
Animals' interactions with each other.
Yeah, I just think releasing like a cat into the wild does a lot more damage than, keeping it. Yeah, I just think making them in the wild is...
Check. Audio working.
I just think we should stop making them, like, there are too many and they don't need to exist.
But it just feels a bit, I guess, like, speciesist, right? It's like we're saying,
So right now, just waiting for them to get everything set up here
and, like,
in the debate room.
We're appealing to some, like, kind of race realism thing.
I mean, I also think there should be less humans. I'm not advocating for genocide, I just think less things should be born.
Right.
Oh, okay.
And
that's sweet. Okay, so just
I
click
think
on it.
just going around killing predators, for example, would damage the ecosystem. But in general, it's better for there to be more herbivores than to be more carnivores, because I mean, we
Sorry
don't
if you're
need
watching,
to
I'm just
produce
trying to
that
get
many.
everything working
They
and set up here.
don't fit into the ecosystem in the first.
Mute that for now. Making sure all the audio is going to be coming through, and we're waiting for them to get the debate room set up and make an announcement here, so might be a couple minutes. Huh. So it doesn't look like we're going to get a live text chat on the stream. Excuse me. It's really smoky here, and it's been really messing with me. Okay, cool. So we do have a live. Cool. I like it. So it looks like everything's working with the stream.
My thought is that we allow them to breed in whatever way they want, and we take care of them as long as we can, but we give them the free choice to leave.
Alright, looks like everything is working, so we're just waiting for the debate to officially start here. So, in just a minute or two, we should have somebody ready to get this thing going here. My argument, if you've never heard the contingency argument before, is a argument that made William Lane Craig really come to the forefront of the philosophical realm, especially when it comes to theism versus atheism. And it's the argument that first premise is everything exists has an explanation of its existence. Premise 2 is if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Premise 3 is the universe exists, which hardly anybody denies, at least people who are looking for truth. And then the logical conclusion of all that is that the explanation of the universe's existence is God. And the whole argument is to show that to deny any of these, that you have to deny one of these premises in order to be an atheist, which is biting the bullet logically, because all of this is logical, so the conclusion logically follows, right? So that's what will be, the debate will be around, that's what my argument will be.
Will be. I don't think they would understand the idea of making a choice to. Yeah, they wouldn't know what life they were getting into.
Well, that's true. It wouldn't necessarily be an informed choice, but I still think it's important for them to make their own choice. Like, I don't think we should be making those decisions for them. We don't know whether or not they're capable.
And you'll
of
have to forgive me if I bump my desk. This microphone is
restricting their freedom. We should just let them make their own choice.
Microphone is very sensitive, so it might be some kind of metallic tunking during if I bump things the wrong way. So I apologize in advance.
Well, that's kind of Darwinist.
But
yeah.
Well, I'm just saying we're not doing anything wrong then. Like, it's okay to, like, just let them make their own choice. If they commit suicide, knowingly or not, then that's chill, but...
I'm excited.
So you're saying
I don't know about you, but I'm excited.
Inaction can't be immoral?
I love defending God. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
I don't know.
Wouldn't you say that with cats we can be, or even know that they're going to do something that would then make us restrain them? Like, if they don't do those things, then they would die, right? Because they would hunt.
Yeah, and again, just waiting for them to get everything set up with the debate room and get an announcement made and everything.
Yeah, I think if I understand what you're saying that even with cats, for example, we should, like, let them free. And if they do something bad, like, I don't know, killing another animal,
I don't know where you guys
then we should
are,
restrain them.
but in
Yeah.
Washington
know
right
that they're
now on
going
the
to
West
kill other
Coast, and
animals,
the
we let them
smoke
free,
here is
because they need
really
to
bad.
know
It's really messing
in
with me,
order to
so I
survive.
might have some frogs in my throat.
Like,
And
why not restrict their
might not be in
freedom
my
for-
best
It's
I don't
like
know.
Oral-
putting the
oration
bird's freedom to live
skills
above the
on
cat's
display here,
freedom
if that makes
to
sense.
hunt, I guess.
You're back.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have much of an answer to this. It's when I think about these kinds of things, it's mostly it's mostly on an intuitive level rather than like a thinking through all the consequences level, right? Like, to me, just restricting something's freedom is kind of like bad in and of itself, so I just don't want to do it, unless there's like something where it's like, well, they've killed a bunch of people and they're clearly going to do it again, then it feels okay. But it just doesn't feel just to just say, you're a cat, so we know that you're going to do something, you're going to commit crimes, so I'm going to preemptively imprison you. It just feels really weird. But I get what you're saying.
I think it's a case where both things are bad. It's like a lose-lose, because it's bad to imprison something and take away their choices, but it's also bad to let something horrible happen. So you've just got to choose the one that gives the better result.
I guess so. So, I mean, let's say that we want to keep the, we don't want to let the animals just, or at least the predatory animals run free, right? Then I would say what we'd want to do is allow them to breed freely within our society, and we have an obligation to protect them until such a time comes when they happen to become herbivores through natural selection. And but then there's the question of, do we now have an obligation to go capture all the carnivores, right? Or
Are you guys familiar with Avi's argument, like, against predators? I don't know if you know who Avi is, like Dr. Avi from another server. Ask yourself. Yeah, he made this argument, like, he's a vegan, but he still made this argument against predators, that it wouldn't be wrong to kill them also into extinction. And like, he also had debates like the vegan gays on this. Actually made vegan gays concede, I think.
I'm split on that issue. I think we shouldn't hunt anything to extinction because of the effects. But it would still be better to kill a predator than to kill an herbivore, like in a singular case.
Yeah, of course, if the effects are actually worse, if the outcome is worse, killing predators, then of course we wouldn't do it. But like the Avi's argument is that it wouldn't be worse. Like, let's say if we can account for that, then it wouldn't be wrong. But yeah, there's a lot more to it. Yeah, I don't know if I did a good job resuming it.
I mean, yeah, there are effects to be considered. It's not like if we kill like all carnivores, then all herbivores will live a beautiful life and, you know, die of old age with all their family. It's still nature.
For hunger and stuff like that, and disease and all of the other things. Yeah.
But I think, I mean, we've seen the effects of hunting predators for sport. Like, you know, in my country, I think we hunted all the wolves out because,
head into the debate
I don't
room
know,
here in just
they have
a
nice
second.
skins and we wanted to keep our
Finish
sheep
making
around.
my
Now we're
announcements here.
overpopulated by deer, and then we just went and killed all the deer instead because we have to keep them from overpopulating, which is, you know, like we caused the overpopulation. So in this case, killing predators just led to herbivores being killed in the future because of how our society justifies things.
Yeah.
Like, we still have to, the population still has to be controlled somehow, and sadly they've evolved to account for being hunted, which...
Alright, we're in the debate room. Let them unmute me, and then they're going to make an announcement, and then we'll get this started, so maybe just a couple minutes. If you're watching, I appreciate you. And
so I guess we have, did you do an announcement already, or do we?
No. scoffed. I don't even know how to do the whole debate setup thing yet. I haven't figured it out.
Well, hold on.
It's scheduled. I don't think it was.
Oh, what's? Okay, then yeah. If you want to just whenever you're ready to start.
This will be a
if you wanna
plug
just
real quick for my
debate,
Discord
discussion, ping,
server.
or whatever,
I actually have my own Discord
list
server
out the
set up
prop, 'cause
with
I don't know
all
what the
of
prop
this
is, and then just
archive
say
of
who's for and against.
information that I'm working on.
Okay.
There's about 1,500 things or so on here that I've got right now, and I'm working toward adding more. Most of it's videos right now.
We can
But I'll be
do
putting
impromptu,
debate notes,
debates.
all
We don't
kinds
have
of
to always
things
have
in
them
here.
scheduled,
So it'll be kind of a good
if you
good
are
hub
the one doing it,
of
typically, then you
information
know what the prop
around
is, so.
God and the gospel and the Bible and all of that. But just a plug for that if you are into Discord at all or want to have access to something like that. Check, check.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, what's up?
What ping am I putting out?
I'm gonna do it. Just one second.
Oh, okay. When you guys want me to do the opener, let me know.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and hit the recording and editing out later, so,
What
you
ping
know,
am I putting out?
whenever you guys are ready, you can do your thing.
Alright.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can actually do a debate thing. Yeah, it's not coming up like when I it's not doing the text completion when I type in like debate thing or whatever. But
It's
can
not
just-
showing you debate ping?
yeah.
Try typing ping and then scrolling down.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because debate, it'll show you other shit related to debate before that. I think it's an ABC order or something.
Yeah, and there's no like you can't scroll down.
Yeah.
Before we get started, Tough Love, I just want to make sure we're on the same page about what the debate's going to be like. So the discussion we were sort of having was basically beforehand, the informal one was basically me saying that I don't think you have a good enough reason because you were just saying like you believe that existence itself is evidence for the existence of God, and I was kind of saying that's not the case. Is that still the kind of vein you want to go with this, or do you want me to positively claim that God isn't real?
No, I'm making the positive claim. My claim is the explanation of the universe's existence is God. So I'll be defending that. I'll be using Leibniz's argument. So.
All right, well, let's see.
Just wondering if you want to tell me or not. Do you consider yourself like atheist or agnostic, or what do you consider yourself?
I've recently, I used to think an atheist was just somebody who doesn't believe in God, but now I've heard the philosophical definition being a person who believes that God does not exist, and I'm not that. So the best way to describe myself is agnostic.
Yeah.
But by some definitions of atheist, I'd be an atheist as well because I don't believe in God. But
yeah, so you'd consider you would be like, I forget who it is that I think it's Michael Shermer, but they assert like it's atheistic agnostic versus a theist agnostic, where an atheistic agnostic starts from the position of there is no God.
I don't start. Well, yeah, I guess I start from the position that there is no God, sort of. I start from the position of being agnostic about everything, right? And I'm still there.
Gotcha. Have you ever heard this argument before?
The Leibniz argument?
Yeah.
Or maybe I have, but I didn't know it was called the Leibniz argument.
Or the Kalam argument.
Oh, think I've heard of this, but I don't know exactly what it is. But I think I remember that that name.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, William Lane Craig is.
Nah.
Oh.
Well, again, I feel like the name's sort of familiar, but
Yeah,
yeah,
he's
very big.
one of the leading philosophers, you know, in contemporary philosophy, and he's kind of the antithesis or whatever of Richard Dawkins. Like he's a double doctorate, and he did his doctorates on this argument and you know, the cosmological, metaphysical evidence of God.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah. It's a deductive argument.
Okay, so
Do you
are we
guys
good
want
to start?
or do you want me to do the opener?
Yeah, you go ahead and do.
I
the
did want to
opening
just
line.
clarify, I did have like an opening and closing statement. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
that too, but
Nah, so I think what we'll do is Lion will give a basic entry to the debate, like Stone usually does or whatever. Like, oh, we've got these guys debating this, and then you give your opening argument, like in defense of your proposition, and then we'll just from there go right into me kind of attacking your points or whatever.
yeah, sounds good.
All right. Welcome everyone. This is a debate between Asgarad and Tough Love Philosophy. Tough Love Philosophy is taking the position that the explanation of the universe's existence is God, and Asgarad is taking the opposition. I don't think there's a time limit, and the winner will be decided by either concession or a vote at the end of the debate. And with that, you guys can get started.
All right. People can't find God for the same reason a criminal can't find a judge. I love that quote. It's something I heard a while back, and it's really resonates. But that'll be kind of make a lot more sense once we go through the argument here. So why does anything at all exist? Why something instead of nothing? Leibniz claimed the explanation is found in God, but is this reasonable? So the argument, which I'm going to put in chat here. Proposition 1 is that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or an external cause. Proposition 2 is if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. And then Proposition 3, the universe exists. Anybody who's honestly seeking truth usually will grant this premise. So usually the contention is in premise 1, premise 2. But our logical conclusion from this deductive argument is that the explanation of the universe's existence is God. So the third premise, like I said, undeniable. Usually, I'm not sure if we can agree to move past that, hopefully so, and just focus on the first two propositions. But on proposition 1, on an explanation of existence, why not just say, like Bertrand Russell said, the universe is just there, and that's all. No explanation needed. End of discussion. Well, imagine if you're walking through the woods. Richard Taylor, philosopher, made this scenario. It's really a good one here. Imagine walking through the woods with a friend and finding a shiny sphere on the ground, a translucent shiny sphere. You'd naturally wonder, why is it there? You'd think it odd if your friend just said there's no reason or explanation for it. Stop wondering, it just is. And if the ball were larger, it wouldn't change that it needed an explanation. It could be the size of the universe, in fact. The change in its size wouldn't remove need for an explanation. Curiosity about the size of the universe seems scientific and intuitive. You might say, if everything that exists needs an explanation, what about God? Doesn't he need an explanation? And if God doesn't need an explanation, why does the universe need an explanation? To address this, Leibniz claimed that the key distinction is between things that exist necessarily and things that exist contingently. Things that exist necessarily exist by their own nature, so it's impossible for them not to exist. Many mathematicians believe that numbers and sets exist like this, maybe propositions and sentences, but they're not contingently they're not caused to exist by something else. They just exist by necessity of their own nature. Things that exist contingently are caused to exist by something else. Most of the things we are familiar with exist contingently, and they don't have to exist. They only exist because something else caused them to exist. There's no reason to believe the world around us had to exist. If the universe developed differently, there might have been no stars or planets, and it's logically possible that the universe might not have existed at all. The universe doesn't exist necessarily, it exists contingently. If the universe might not have existed, why does it exist? The only adequate explanation of a contingent universe is that its existence rests on a non-contingent being, something that cannot exist because of the necessity of its own nature. Cannot not exist because of the necessity of its own nature. It would exist no matter what. So everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. And then proposition 2, is it reasonable to call the explanation of the universe God? What is the universe? It's all of space, time, reality, including all matter and energy. It logically follows that if the universe has a cause of its existence, that cause cannot be part of the universe. It must be non-physical and immaterial, beyond space and time. The list of entities that this could possibly fit this description is fairly short. It's only 2. Abstract objects and God. And abstract objects cannot cause anything. This argument shows that the existence of the universe can be found only in the existence of God, or if you prefer not to use that term or don't know what the definition of God is, you may simply call him the extremely powerful, uncaused, necessarily existing, non-contingent, immaterial, non-physical, eternal being who created the entire universe and everything in it. And that's my opening.
All right, that's a lot to handle. So I think that the way this is probably going to go is the first while of this debate will probably be more like a discussion, because I really need to figure out like what you mean by all this and talk about this before I will really even know if I disagree, right? So I guess my first question is, what would it look like for something to exist necessarily by virtue of its own nature? What does that mean?
So for something to exist necessarily by its own nature means it would have to exist. Right there, it's not
really an opening statement. It's not a rhetorical question. I'm just going right into the back and forth at this point.
Yeah, so like think of like numbers, right? That's an example that mathematicians use, and that Leibniz used, because Leibniz, I don't know if you know, he was the inventor of calculus. He was a mathematician. So the mathematicians would assert that.
No, he's muted.
So sorry. I'm so sorry. Let me start over. Sorry. So Leibniz was a mathematician. He discovered calculus, but he and other mathematicians would assert that numbers are necessarily existing, right? They have to exist. There's nothing that could cause them to exist. They just have to exist by necessity of their own nature, if that makes sense. There's other philosophers have asserted propositions, like the proposition of a sentence. Like you could say the same sentence in multiple languages, but the proposition of the sentence is there, right?
Yeah. So first of all, I don't grant the thing we're comparing it to, right? Like I don't think that math or numbers do exist separately from human minds or from perhaps some alien minds.
Yeah, we would agree there. I would also
propositions and sentences
agree with that.
Right.
But that's a different argument.
So there's another kind of issue I'm having with the idea of something existing by virtue of its own nature, which is I don't see how something can have a nature without it existing in the first place.
Well, that's what makes it necessary.
But it's a circular causation then, right?
How so?
Well, like, something has to exist in order for it to have a nature, but we're saying that the nature is what causes it to exist. That causation can't really...
It would necessarily existing wouldn't have a cause. That would make it contingent. Does that make sense?
Necessarily existing wouldn't have a cause. It would be... Right.
So it would have to be eternal. Logically.
Gotcha. So why? I guess my question is, why is it necessary that it exists?
What do you mean?
Why is it?
But see, that's
like you say, it's
the framing of that question is assuming that it's contingent, right? The why is addressing what is the cause.
Well, I guess I just don't grant that such a thing could exist then.
So let's
But we're
run. Do
getting
you want to
into
run that logically to the logical conclusion, or?
Oh god. Sure.
So if you want, we can skip it. I'm also going to share after this debate. William Lane Craig and Cosmic Skeptic actually had a whole discussion on this, and they agreed that the only way that you can logically deny Proposition 1 and Proposition 2 is if you adhere to moral nihilism, or like ontological nihilism, or solipsism, where you deny that anything truly actually exists, and to claim that the universe can pop into existence, come into existence from nothing, and that it's the only thing that could do that, and it would have to be by a property that only the universe has, which would presuppose the law of identity, that the universe would have this part of its identity before it ever existed.
So I don't know if this is the argument, but here's what would sort of make me agree with you on this. When I think about causation, we have the same problem with like justifying a belief system where the causal chains bottom out eventually, and then what created those? And then you have to say that, well, nothing created them, they were always there, or something. Where there's some kind of circular time going on. But if there's a circular time thing going on, then what created the circle of time, I guess? So
well, that would be God, right? That created time, because if you look, I put the definition of God that I use in chat.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Sorry, are you saying something, or what? What's up?
Oh, sorry, I was just saying that the answer to that would be God, logically, by this argument.
So, I guess one question I have would be, does the idea of God actually solve this problem?
Yeah, because God necessarily exists. He would have to exist by his own nature in order to create a contingent universe.
I'm just trying to figure out if I can actually imagine something existing just necessarily by virtue of its own nature. I don't really, I'm not sure I can conceive of that. But does that make sense to you? Like, you can wrap your head around that, or?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I mean, I just want to be open and clear. This isn't like some argument that I came up with, or some fringe argument. Like, this is, I'm honestly surprised that you wanted to have this debate, because this is a very, very staple debate in the contemporary philosophical world. But in order to logically deny one of those propositions, you have to bite a bullet.
Well, that might be the case, but I'm trying to figure out, like, I just don't fully understand the first premise, I guess, because I don't really quite understand.
Yeah, so it's always one of the two premises that you get hung up on. So that's where I was going to go next, is which premise did you want to kind of, but you wanted to kind of flesh things out, it sounded like, so.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm still in the process of fleshing it out, and I probably have problems with the second premise as well, but the first one, it just seems strange to me that something could exist by virtue of its own nature. Like, that's not how I... It just exists. Nothing caused it to exist. It just exists. But when you say it exists because it's necessary for it to exist, it does feel like there's some kind of cause going on, some kind of contingency. Like, if it wasn't necessary for it to exist, it wouldn't exist, right?
Right. And we don't have to chase this rabbit, but I would just tie the circle back to what we were talking about, was it yesterday or the other day, about, this that we can't comprehend it, and that's why it's a good piece of evidence in the cumulative case for God.
Well, that doesn't feel like very compelling evidence to me if I can't understand it. It's hard for me to believe something I don't understand.
Hallelujah.
So, do you agree that, like, saying that it exists, like, do you agree that it existing by virtue of its own necessity is still a contingent sort of existence?
No, not at all. There's a clear line between contingent and necessary existence.
Well, but what if it wasn't existent? Then it wouldn't exist, right? Well, what if it wasn't necessary to exist, I mean? Then it wouldn't exist, right? Necessarily.
Well, it would have to necessarily. Like, the concept, you can't attribute, like, a characteristic to nothing. There can't logically be no thing. As William Lane Craig says there necessarily has to be something, but there doesn't have to be something necessarily.
Like, do you see my point? Like, it seems contingent to me that whatever we're talking about, this necessary thing, it seems contingent to me that it is necessary in the first place. Like, it could not be necessary, in which case it wouldn't exist.
Yeah, so you'd have to make an argument on that, yeah.
So I guess what is the thing that leads God to be necessary, or whatever it is that we're talking about to be necessary?
Well, deductive reasoning. Right, that's the whole.
Oh.
That's the whole point of this argument. It's a deductive logic argument. It's a logical conclusion.
Okay, so you've got a whole argument baked into the first premise, then, right?
I'm sorry. I guess I misunderstood what you're asking. Sorry.
Well, if you just said, okay. So my question is, so let's say God is necessary to exist, and that's why God exists. Well, why would it be that God exists necessarily? Like, what is it that makes it necessary?
Well, because of premise 2. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Okay, you see, so they're logically dependent upon each other, right? If one is logically true, the other is. Just like the inverse, if atheism is true, there is no explanation for the universe. Therefore, if there is an explanation for the universe, then atheism is not true, right? Those are the inverse of these premises, or of these propositions.
Okay, so first of all, let me deal with the first premise, because I do have an issue with this. Everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. This seems impossible to me because, as I said, the hierarchy has to bottom out at some point. How could it be that everything has an explanation?
Well, when it bottoms out, the bottom is God, because again, there logically can't exist just no thing.
Right. So then, what is it that explains God? And you say the necessity of its own nature, but yes. Then what leads to the necessity of God's own nature?
So everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. And if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God, and the universe exists. So logically, the explanation of the universe's existence is God.
Okay, yeah, right. So my point is that I'm taking issue with premise 1 by saying that it's contradictory, or it's impossible for everything that exists to have an explanation of its existence in either of the two ways that you've listed, because, as I say, just because of the topological nature of those kinds of relationships, you can't have single directional relationships that just everything's justified. It's impossible, right? Or everything's caused, or whatever, or everything has an explanation for its existence. It bottoms out. And what you said is that, well, when it bottoms out, that's where God comes in. And I was saying, well, that doesn't quite solve the problem, because what causes God? And you said, well, the necessity of God's nature causes God.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that, because God is not contingent. He does not have a cause. That was what I said.
So God doesn't have
So it bottoms out at necessity.
So does
contingency
God have an
bottoms at
explanation
necessity.
For their existence?
Sorry, what?
Does God have an explanation for their existence?
Well, God is necessary. So there's no explanation because it's not caused, because he's not contingent.
So premise 1 is false then?
No. How so?
Because you've just said that God doesn't have an explanation of their existence.
Either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. So,
Okay, so-
in this
so you're saying
instance,
that
it
God
would
does
be
have an
in the
explanation.
necessity of its own nature.
That
That's
is
the
of its
explanation,
existence.
not the cause.
Yeah, well, I was asking about explanations, not causes.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. So,
You said cause.
well,
unless
earlier,
I misheard.
Just, sure, okay. So, if the explanation for God's existence would be the necessity of God's own nature, right?
Sorry, what was that?
The explanation for God's existence would be the necessity of God's nature.
Well, the explanation, right, of his existence is the necessity of his own nature.
Mm-hmm. So, then the question is, what is the explanation for the existence of God's own nature?
Well, that would imply causation, which would imply contingency, which would undermine necessity.
No, I'm not saying causation. I'm asking for explanation of their existence, of its existence, which is, you said that everything has, so we shouldn't have a problem here.
Yeah. So the explanation is the universe that we're in, right? The contingent universe and everything in it, because everything that we can observe inside of this universe is contingent.
Sorry, you're saying that the necessity of God's own nature, the explanation for the existence of God's own nature, is the universe?
Wait, what?
So I'm asking you, what is the explanation for the existence of, quote-unquote, God's own nature?
Well, that would be the existence of God. If he exists, then he has a nature. Everything that exists has a nature.
Okay, so then we have circular explanation for existence,
No.
right? Well, yes, because you said that God exists. The explanation for God's existence is God's own nature, and the explanation for God's own nature's
The
existence
necessity
is God.
of its own nature. You've skipped that part.
Oh, okay. So what is the explanation for the existence of the necessity of God's own nature?
Again, that would imply causation, which would imply contingency, which would undermine
No.
necessity.
No, it's not implying causation. I'm just going with what you said in premise one, which is that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. I'm just asking, what is the explanation for the existence of the necessity of God's own nature?
Well, the existence of God.
Okay, so then we're back to a circular explanation.
No. You just aren't.
Okay, so I'm just going to explain how it's circular. So I asked you, what is the
Read premise
explanation
2
for
real
God's-
quick. Just real quick, read premise 2.
Wait, if premise 1 doesn't stand on its own, then I don't have to read premise 2. They shouldn't be premises side by side if one's contingent upon the other. It should be premise, conclusion, and then the second conclusion that follows from the first conclusion. But you said they were premises, so they have to stand on their own, right? So
Well, but you.
Um,
Okay, go ahead.
okay, so let me just explain why I think it's circular. So you said that the explanation, so everything that exists has an explanation for its existence, right? Now we're saying, okay, well, what is the explanation for God's existence? And we said the necessity of God's own nature. And then we asked, what is the explanation for the existence of the necessity of God's own nature? And you said God. That is circular.
No, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. So God is the explanation of God's necessity.
Okay,
It's not circular, it's logical.
okay. I think it's pretty clear that it's circular, because again, what we have is an explanation for something's existence, which is a one-way relationship, and so it's like an arrow pointing from A to B, and what we've stated is A is the explanation for the existence, or A is God, B is the necessity of God's own nature, and what we've got is that you've said that A is the explanation for the existence of B, and B is the explanation of the existence for A.
Correct. That is how a contingent necessity relationship works.
No, that's how a circular relationship
No.
works, right? Contingent is one way, where you have like B is contingent upon A, C is contingent upon B, and so on. And sure, contingent relationships can be circular, so this is a subset of contingent relationships, but it's also circular, and I don't find circular explanations to be particularly convincing.
Okay, so the fallacy that you're engaging in that's getting tripped up here is that you're assuming that there is nothing outside of the universe. You are assuming that atheism is true. So that is begging the question.
No, I'm going with your premise. You said everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, and that's the only thing I've used in these arguments, except for a little bit of logic, I guess. I haven't assumed anything else. Can you point out what other assumption I'm making? And how it actually relates to what I said? Like,
well, you're saying that it's circular because of the question that you're asking. The question that you're asking has the baked-in assumption that there is no causation for the universe.
Please explain how the question I'm asking has that baked-in assumption.
So everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. So in this case, it's the necessity of its own nature. So you're asking the question, what is the explanation of the necessity of its own nature? Premise 2 holds if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God.
Well, but I don't... Again, premise 1 must stand on its own, right? Like, it must be true on its own. The only way the conclusion follows from premises 1, 2, and 3 is if premise 1 is true, premise 2 is true, and premise 3 is true. If I just inspect premise 1 and it's like... So I guess what you're saying is that... Okay.
Premise 2 logically follows from premise 1. Premise 1 logically follows from premise 2.
Right, but I haven't granted either of them yet, right?
Well, yeah, I know that.
Okay, so the trouble is that premise 1 seems contradictory to me. It seems impossible to me.
On what ground?
Well, as I say, where does the explanation for existence relationships, where does that bottom out, right? It can't bottom out at God because you said that everything has an explanation for its existence, including God. And you said it's by the necessity of its own nature. That doesn't solve the problem because the necessity of its own nature must therefore have an explanation for its existence because it's a thing that exists, and so it must have an explanation for its existence by premise 1.
Right, and that explanation is God.
Regression.
I'm answering your question with premise 2. So logically, we would now move to discussing and debating premise 2, right?
Okay, sorry. Okay, sure. Okay, so you're saying, in what way does premise 2, solve this trouble that I'm having with the circularity of your explanation for?
Well, it doesn't seem, like Arco just said, it doesn't seem you're grasping that necessity is an explanation.
No, I'm grasping that necessity is an explanation. I'm granting that it's an explanation. It's just that when I asked you what the explanation is for that necessity, right? What the explanation.
But that's like saying, what is the explanation for explanation?
Well, no, like it's not what is the explanation for.
Well, if necessity is the explanation, and you're saying what is the explanation of necessity, you're saying what is the explanation of explanation?
No, I'm not asking what is the explanation of explanation. I'm asking what is the explanation of this particular thing, which you've referenced as the explanation for this other thing.
Necessity.
You've said that everything has an explanation for its existence, so it seems like a very reasonable question to ask, right? And you did answer it. You said that the explanation for the existence of the necessity of God's existence, or the necessity of God's own nature, was God. And it's like, okay, well, you've answered my question. We have no problem here, except that you said that A is the explanation for the existence of B, while B is the explanation for the existence of A. And that is circular. That's a circular structure. And
I'm telling you that the answer to your question is premise 2. So in an argument of deductive reasoning, we would then now move from premise 1 to premise 2 because I am asserting premise 2 as the answer to the question that you're posing to question 1. So now we would logically move to premise 2, and then you would have to debate against premise 2 because premise 2 is the answer to your question.
Okay, so the problem that I'm having is that I think premise 1 implies relies upon a circular argument, and you're saying that premise 2 answers this question. So let's see if premise 2 solves this trouble, right? So if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Sure. So let's debate about whether or not this is a sound premise first of all. So can you explain? I think you explained this in the introduction, but can you defend this again?
So in premise one, everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. So now the explanation is either as necessity of its own nature, when the answer to the question about God. And so the explanation of God's existence is God. And that's not circular, that is based on the necessity.
Sorry, I'm failing to grasp why it's necessarily true that if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God.
Because the universe is contingent, so it has to be contingent upon something that is necessary.
Okay, and you're saying that anything which is necessary is therefore God?
Correct.
Well,
or if you don't like God, you can call him the extremely powerful, uncaused, necessarily existing, non-contingent, immaterial, non-physical, eternal being who created the entire universe and everything in it.
Well, I would just say that it's a thing that caused the universe. Is that what we're like?
Correct.
Yeah, no, it's just the explanation of the existence of the universe. But I don't think that's necessarily has all these other things. Extremely powerful, uncaused.
Well, I'm just giving a definition for God so that doesn't become a hang-up.
The other thing is that I don't think that these two categories, right, non-contingent, I don't think, like when you say contingent and then you say something that's necessary by its own nature, I think it's still contingent because it's contingent upon the necessity of its own nature.
Well, you would have to prove that then.
Well, I can do that, I think, pretty easily by just saying that if it was not necessary, then it would not necessarily exist, and that's a possibility. So it's contingent upon the fact of.
But you just smuggled something in. You said that isn't true. You have to defend that.
I said if it's not true.
Oh, okay.
Pardon?
Oh, I said, oh, okay. I must have misheard you.
Yeah, like the just because something exists necessarily by the virtue of its own, or by virtue of its own nature or whatever, it's still contingent because if it didn't have this attribute of necessarily existing, well, then it wouldn't necessarily exist.
So the fallacy you're engaging in is you're saying that something that's necessary isn't necessarily necessary. It can be contingent.
Yeah, I'm saying you're claiming that it's necessary, or that like we're hypothesizing like something being necessary, but I'm saying that kind of like it's still contingent. Like we could take anything like an apple or something. Well, it exists. So how could you say? Well, you're just engaging in a fallacy because you're saying like, well, what if it didn't exist? We can imagine that it didn't exist. Well, it does exist. Well,
it exists contingently.
Sure, but the like what does it mean for something to be contingent as opposed to non-contingent? You're just
to have an external cause.
But I'm saying that those two things aren't like but you're saying that like I think that something which exists by virtue of its own necessity, or by the necessity of its own nature, is still contingent upon its own nature. And it's caused in a sense by its own nature, or the explanation is its own nature, and so it's still contingent, right? It's contingent upon its own nature.
No, because it's necessary. So what you're doing is you're engaging in that fallacy that I just said a minute ago. You're saying that something that's necessary isn't necessarily necessary. It can be contingent, which is a fallacy logically. It's like saying that's like saying, you can have a married bachelor, right?
Well, No, but the whole point is like, so you're saying that's a fallacy to say that something which has attribute A could potentially not have attribute A, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that one.
Well, yeah, the way that you criticized my point was to say that you're saying that something which is necessary could possibly is not necessarily necessary.
Right.
So like another example would be, you're saying, okay, something that's blue is not necessarily blue, right?
Well, blue isn't
So something
necessary.
with attribute A doesn't necessarily have attribute A. That's the form of the fallacy you're talking about, right?
But is blue necessary?
Well, neither is necessity, is it?
Well, see, again, you're engaging in the fallacy. You're saying necessity isn't
Not a
necessarily
fallacy.
necessary. It can be contingent.
Necessity is not necessary. I can imagine a world in which nothing is necessary, but everything is contingent upon its.
Just because
upon
you
each
can
other.
imagine something doesn't make it true. That's like a huge fallacy.
I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying it's possible by virtue of it not being contradictory with anything
Well, you can
else.
put your faith into that, but you have to bite a bullet there.
No, I'm not biting any bullet. I'm just not granting to you an assumption that you've made, which is that necessity is necessary. I don't grant that.
Well, that's a
It's
fallacy.
not-
I mean, you can hold a
it's
fallacy.
not
That's
a
fine,
fallacy.
but it's a fallacy. That's like saying a bachelor can be married. Like,
No, I'm saying it's like saying that bachelors are not necessarily existing. Necessary things do not necessarily exist, right? There's not necessarily this set of things within the universe or even outside of the universe in existence that are necessary.
it's contradictory
I
to
don't-
say something necessary isn't necessarily necessary.
Well, in the same way that you would say something blue is not necessarily blue is contradictory, right?
No. Again, the
Well,
married
yes,
bachelor,
right?
it's a contradiction. You're saying that a bachelor can be married.
Right. It's like, so here's a better example. Like,
No,
it's
this
like
is the
saying-
best example we have in contemporary philosophy. I'd rather stick with it.
So, for example, like a bachelor is like saying a bachelor is not necessarily a bachelor, right?
Correct. Which is a
Okay.
fallacy.
So that's what I meant when I was talking about something that's blue is not necessarily blue, right?
Well,
Something that's a
no,
bachelor
no,
is not
because a
necessarily
bachelor, no. Hold on. Back up. The whole bachelor thing is an example of contradiction. The bachelor thing is not part of the necessity. It's showing that you're engaging in a contradiction. A bachelor cannot
Okay,
be married. That's a
I gotta say,
contradiction.
I
A
don't-
necessarily
I don't
thing
understand the difference between
cannot
saying,
not
like-
necessarily exist.
Okay, sure. So I do not see that. So if I say a bachelor is not necessarily a bachelor, right? So the point is that
Well,
it's
yeah,
not
because
necessarily
bachelor
the
is
case.
contingent, right, on the concept of marriage. That's not the argument here. You're trying to shift goalposts.
I don't think I am. I'm trying I'm trying as best I can to point out what I see to be a flaw in your argument, because it
Right.
doesn't
I
seem to.
understand
It's
that.
like, right, like, it's like you're presupposing that God is necessary.
No,
Right.
because by the definition of necessary, it's not presupposing. You're the one that's presupposing. You're presupposing that atheism is true. Again, remember
I
we
don't
talked
think
about
I
the
am.
inverse of
What?
proposition 1 and 2.
I'm not presupposing that atheism is true. How am I presupposing that?
Because you're presupposing that something necessary can't necessarily be necessary.
What does that have to do with atheism?
Because there's a line. This argumentation is drawing a line. You're either theist or atheist, right? With this logical deduction, like I said, you have to bite a bullet.
So it's not assuming atheism. I'm making an argument which would imply atheism, but it wouldn't quite imply atheism. It would just say that I'm not convinced of your argument. But like,
Well, that's fine. You don't have to be. I mean, you can say I'm not convinced by your argument, right? But
well,
you're
I'm
not
saying that
logically
I don't think you
doing
provided
so.
a valid justification for believing that God is the cause of the universe or the explanation for the universe.
Right, I get that you think that it's valid. I understand that. Right, that's not...
Sure. So, anyway, I'm going to move on from premise one. So again, so if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Okay, so I just disagree. I think it is a pony, right? I believe it is. Sorry, what's
Yeah,
that?
see, and this is what you have to
Rainbow
resort
Dash,
to,
right?
because this is a deductive logical argument. So this is the kind of thing you have to resort to, right? You have to leave logic and start engaging in fallacious or facetious behavior because you don't have a logical answer, and that's okay.
Well,
So understand that's okay, but you need to know this argument exists so that you can start looking into it, because this is a core argument in contemporary philosophy.
okay, well, I agree that it was somewhat facetious, but I don't think it was fallacious.
Well, I'm just saying you
Facetiousness
have
doesn't
to
really
engage in
matter.
either fallacious or facetious behavior, or both. I mean,
Well, you're claiming this, but I don't grant that that's the case. But anyway,
while you're proving
so
it true.
so okay, sure. So all I'm saying is that claim is not really part of the proposition. So I'll grant it. I'll grant that I need to engage in facetious behavior in order to win this debate. So now I don't grant that the explanation for the universe's existence is God. Rather, I posit an alternative hypothesis, an alternative explanation, which would be Rainbow Dash, who does not fit all of those properties that you mentioned in your definition.
Okay. Well, that's a whole different
chapter.
debate, and we could have that. We could set up and have that debate too. But if
It's
you're
not a
done with
different
this one, we
debate.
can do the closing statements. That's fine with me.
It's not a separate debate. I'm saying
It
that
is.
like it's not okay. So sure. How about you just explain why it's necessarily the case that if the universe has an explanation of its existence, then that explanation is God.
Okay. So everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation then is God. So the universe exists, so we can logically conclude that the explanation of the universe's existence is God, or if you don't want to call him that, you can also call him the extremely powerful,
Right.
uncaused, necessarily existing, non-contingent, immaterial, non-physical, eternal being who created the entire universe and everything in it.
But I don't grant premise one. So you
I
have to
understand
justify
that.
premise two with something other than premise one.
Okay, so what is your argument against premise one?
Well, I've already said I don't think it's yeah, whatever. Okay, I don't again, like I think that it's impossible by virtue of it necessarily bottoming out into one of three circumstances. One where there is something which does not have an explanation for its existence, in which case it already obviously defeats premise one. Two, you have a circular relationship of explanations for existences of the group of things, in which case the circle itself is not does not have an explanation for its existence, and that defeats premise one. And the third possibility is that you have an infinite regression of
A circle
things
necessarily
explaining their-
exists.
Wait, just let me finish this. So the third possibility is you have infinite regression, where you have some inferential rule that says for any given thing it is explained by some other thing before it by this kind of rule. But then the trouble is that the rule that you use for that inference process is not itself justified. So or explained. The existence of that rule is not explained. So this I'm saying that premise one cannot possibly be true.
Okay. Well, did you want to do closing statements or?
Sure. Yeah. So
Alright.
again, so I don't grant premise one because, as I say, I think that in any kind of one-way relationship, just the topological nature of this will lead to a bottoming out of one of three types. And just to give a brief example, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, well, you've got some thing and you want to find the explanation of its existence, right? So what is that? Okay, you get some other thing. Then you ask for its explanation, then its explanation, then that thing's explanation. And you go back for a really long time, and eventually you have to bottom out into something where you've got either specific things that exist which do not have explanations for their existence, or you have a group of things which all are contingent upon each other. They all explain each other in a circle, in which case you need to provide an explanation for the existence of the circle itself. And the third possibility is that you have an infinite regression, where you have some rule that you state that implies an infinite chain of explanations for explanations for explanations, and it goes on infinitely. But the problem with that is that you would need to explain the existence of the rule which creates that backwards chain, and you cannot do that. So premise 1, I believe, is impossible. Premise 2, the only explanation given for why it's remotely valid is premise 1 and premise 3 together. And I've said that premise 1 is false, so premise 2 is not justified. Premise 3, I grant that the universe exists, and therefore the conclusion has not been justified.
Cool. Thank you. And I definitely want to say thank you to everybody for listening to the debate, and of course, definitely the server for hosting the debate. I really appreciate it. I love this server. Shout out definitely for what it's worth. But my closing statement, I would just say that the argument is a logical, deductive argument. Of course, you can avoid the conclusion that necessarily follows by denying one of the propositions, but what is the intellectual price you're willing to pay to do so? It takes more faith to deny God than to assert God. Dr. William Lane Craig and cosmic skeptic Alex actually discuss this argument and agree on the logic it holds, and that the only real logical way to get around the first two propositions is to assert that the only assert ontological moralism or solipsism, the views that deny the existence of anything, and the assertion that the identity that is the assertion that the universe would pop into existence for no other reason than the universe having a property of its own identity that is unique to the universe and causes the universe to do so, thus presupposing the identity of the universe, presupposing the identity of the universe had this property before it existed. The intellectual price tags to these views is so high that it is easy to argue that they are fringe and have no place in contemporary philosophy in the year 2020 and going forward. All of the smartest minds have asserted that God is a necessary being and logically undeniable, and it is time for contemporary philosophy to accept that God necessarily exists and start moving the discussion forward. Just as the germ theory was finally accepted and moved into contemporary philosophy as a logical assumption, so too now must the existence of God. People can't find God for the same reason that a criminal can't find a judge. Thank you so much for listening again. Appreciate all of you, and I love all of you.
All right. Thank you guys for debating. That was really great. I am going to the voting pool in the debate chat. Whoever was here for at least 75% of the debate, you're able to vote. Is it all right if we use the 3-question one? Because I actually don't know how to pull up the other one.
Yep.
Doesn't matter to me.
Okay. All right. So you do have to vote on every question in order for your vote to be counted, so please do so. And you have like 7 minutes to vote. Sorry. Okay. Here we go. Thank you guys.
Thanks everybody for watching this stream. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. And I really, again, I appreciate you watching, and I hope you know I love you, and I wish the best for you, and I hope this gives you something to think about at least. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.